On a Friday, what's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Hoffman Show. We are on the Team 980. We are always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live as well, youtube.com/@theteam980 if you want to watch the show. All right, so it's the day after, which is kind of funky because in some ways, like, this is the 24-hour mark, at least for us as a station. Like, Russell took the air yesterday with no plan of that being his show. We at least had a couple hour heads up to put some things together and all that kind of stuff. But, yesterday, I know for Chris, it had to be scramble mode. But for us, we were able to put together the show and do all that. And in many ways, like, our big reaction show was yesterday. But what's been interesting to follow today is how, for so many people, it feels like it kind of is sinking in. That, yesterday felt fake and today feels real. Like, you wake up and you're like, oh no, like, he agreed to sell the team. Dan Snyder's really leaving. Whoa, that's cool. And so we got that element of it that, we're obviously, kind of going to get your reaction to today. 301-230-0980 if you want to hop in and jump on the phones with us. But it's been interesting to kind of watch that reaction roll in. Some of the details kind of emerge in the reporting and all those things. And we get to some of the next steps of what has to happen. Got some great conversations coming for you on the show with Field Yates, with Michael Phillips. We actually already taped those. And one of the things that I've been talking about, I talked about those guys, and you'll hear Michael at 5:30, Field at 6. So you got to stick around for those, or catch them later on demand. But, one of the things that I found super interesting about this is kind of the order of operations of what has to happen for Dan Snyder, or for Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales moving forward. Because I do not think that some of the things that fans necessarily want to happen are going to immediately happen on the timelines that they want them to. And then there's also some just like very basic, like, blocking and tackling, for lack of a better analogy. There's the basic blocking and tackling that has to happen on some of this stuff. Like, I yesterday talked about how I think the practice facility is perhaps a more important project than the stadium. But that comes with the reality that Michael pointed out when we chatted. And again, you'll hear that conversation coming up at 5:30. But that comes with the reality that they got to figure out where all that stuff is. The land in Ashburn is super valuable. Do they want to sell that? And I don't know whether they have that answer now. They obviously haven't been able to put it on the market. But, like, this is not the sexy, like, fire the coach, which for some reason that's sexy to a lot of people. But like, that's not the football stuff that people care as much about. But those are the real types of decisions that are going to affect this franchise moving forward of, do you wind up selling the land in Ashburn, building a practice facility, whether it's in D.C., in Landover, another place in Virginia, another place in Maryland? Where does the stadium go? That impacts, other things and the timing of being able to do some of this stuff. But as I've talked about before, like there's consequences to that. The faster that this stuff gets done, the better. Like, one, you want a new stadium because FedEx stinks. Even the people there will tell you that it's awful, which is why I'll give them this credit. And, like Jason came in and immediately was like, we have to do better. And they upgraded like the club section, try to get some of the big money back, which helps finance some of the other stuff. They've been redoing the scoreboards. They've been like, in some cases, it's putting lipstick on a pig, but for a franchise that has the hogs, by the way, Mark Schlereth going to join us later, better than a lipstickless pig in this terrible, tortured analogy. And so I think that, like, when you don't have the meeting space to have your players learn to the best of their capabilities, that's probably an issue. You want to get that fixed ASAP, but you can't just, like, you're not going to knock down the building in Ashburn and rebuild it if you're going to sell that land in a year and build, or in 2 years or 3 years and go somewhere else. So I do think that even as much as I've thought about this, in some ways I've underestimated the task at hand here and the complication of it. And, it's going to be very, very interesting. Josh Harrison and Mitchell Rales and Magic Johnson and whoever else winds up joining their group. I'd assume that for these kinds of conversations, we're really talking about Harrison, Rales, and to an extent Magic in terms of decision-making. Like, they have to figure out, and I have about 6 weeks probably until they meet the press for the first time. I'd assume they do something in Minneapolis if they are ultimately approved there to have some answers to this. And their answers might simply be, we haven't had time to go through it all yet. Like, we did a lot of due diligence to make sure that we could get in the door. But, there's a lot of homework we have to do now that we're in the door. We feel confident we're going to be able to do it, but, there's work to be done, and we don't have all the answers yet. Obviously, they don't know whether they're going to be able to get the RFK Stadium site. I'd imagine they have some idea. I'd imagine that Mitchell Rales, who's the D.C. guy in all of this, obviously Harris from here, but Rales is like the super politically connected D.C. person in this group, that he's talked to some of his contacts, and it has contacts within, the Biden administration. And look, like, there's also the reality that there's, and this is crazy that this is the kind of thing that has to be considered here, but like, the 2024 presidential election matters to the future of the Commanders in a way that no other presidential election that I can think of does. Who's going to be the Secretary of the Department of the Interior? And again, Congress has a huge say, if not the biggest say. So obviously the 2024 congressional elections, who gets elected in the House, who gets elected in the Senate, matters a lot because they've got to approve all this stuff. But like, what absurd planet do we live on? What crazy city do we live in? That who is the president, whether it is Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, or anybody else that might emerge, all due respect to all the other Republicans that are running and polling at less than 10%, who that president is, and thus whose administration is in charge, and who is the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, could matter here on whether or not we get the RFK site, because that 2024 to 2028 window is when this is going to be done. Who wins the governor's mansion in Virginia in 2025 is massively important. Depending on if Maryland is still involved, let me do the math. Wes Moore was just elected for 4 years. Who wins the 2026 Maryland gubernatorial race could matter. That's decisions will have probably long been made by then. And look, there's a chance this all gets done before the 2024 election too, because Harris is going to come in and they're already behind when they want to be. They might have to extend this lease at FedEx for an extra year because they can't get the construction done fast enough, even if they find, the site and cut through a lot of the red tape. Like, is a sheer construction project, this might already be an issue. But they might be able to at least push the decision making through before November of 2024. But clock is ticking. And so the reality of the task at hand is that it's very, very large. And I will also say this in terms of perspective, these are great problems to have all of a sudden, because with Dan in charge, one, we had to talk about other stuff because you couldn't even get to this stuff because he was too busy being terrible, or, people who are terrible were having their behavior exposed, all that kind of stuff. But two, this stuff was off the table. Dan wasn't allowed or wasn't going to be permitted to build anywhere because nobody wanted to be in business with them. No state elected or local elected official, national elected official, nobody wanted to be in the Dan Snyder business. And so we now have a new list of quote unquote problems for Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales to solve. The good news is they're very smart from everything that I've read about them. They're very connected and they're very rich, and they want to solve them. And they don't have the political hurdles in the way, which is why yesterday was a liberating day for so many people and for so many of the things that have surrounded this football team. Again, we got a huge show. Clinton Yates going to join us coming up at 4:30. Mark Schlereth, former Hog, Fox NFL analyst, host out in Denver as well. He does a local radio show. Yeah, Stink, he slops around with us, those local radio folk. He's going to be coming up at 5, and so he'll be able to talk about kind of how quickly the ownership group in Denver was able to make an impact and what that could tell us about the potential for Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales to make some changes here in Washington, whether it be personnel or otherwise. So Stink at 5. Michael Phillips at 5:30. Field Yates at 6. Your calls in between 301-230-0980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live as well on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming live on the Team 980's YouTube page, where you can see Dancing Anthony Haney. Haney, I didn't really get the chance to talk to you a whole lot yesterday about this. You've grown up here your whole... So for the audience that, like, they know you're young Anthony Haney, you're a baby Ant. You're 26, right? So that means you were born 2 years before Dan Snyder took ownership. And so basically your entire life, this man has been in charge of your favorite football team.
He has indeed. And my entire life I have seen, a franchise basically run into the ground. Like from where it used to be, the glory days, my dad, my granddad, everybody talk about what RFK and, the team and franchise used to be to, us almost being like an afterthought. It's almost like as bad as the Cleveland Browns were, a couple of years ago. Like, I mean, they're still, I think, in a pretty bad space right now with Deshaun Watson and everything that's going on there. But just where we've come from, though, to see that we're, down where the Browns are is, a little disheartening, but I'm just glad that it's almost over and done with. I'm one of those people that has like very little patience. So anytime like Dan gets brought up, I immediately just don't even want to like hear about him. And the last couple of years has been tough with everything that's come out about Dan and the sexual assault cases and everything that's going over in the toxic workplace with the Commanders and things of that nature. It's just been tough to have conversations about it, and I don't really like talking about Dan because I just think he's not a good person. But to see everything trending in a more positive way, and with him ultimately almost being on his way out the door, I think it's a win for right now. But until he's like formally signed, sealed, and delivered all the way out of the door, I still have my I'm a little cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I get it. You and Nick Ashew are on the same page. Nick joined us in studio yesterday and was like, I am not ready to celebrate yet. Nick's got his champagne ready, but it's still sitting on ice. And I get that. I would ask someone like Nick's probably 10 years older than you, would be my guess. He's around my age. But like for you especially, did you ever consider just bailing and like becoming a Ravens fan? Because like that's something I was doing a radio hit with our sister station in Rochester earlier, Danger and Battaglia, guys that I've known forever, going back to Syracuse days, and they had me on to talk about this, and they were talking about, they asked the kind of Lamar question of like, hey, would Josh Harris come in and sign Lamar, and what's stopping him? And I was like, well, the first thing that's stopping him is the Ravens and their ability to match contract. But also you got to understand the dynamics at play here, that especially to Washington, the Ravens are not going to want to let him go because of the fan dynamics, because I feel like there are so many people, and you could speak to, instead of me doing the hypothetical, like you can speak to your friend group. I feel like there are so many people that were just like, hey, there's a team that's the same distance away that plays at a better stadium and actually wins football games. I feel like I'll root for them. And I'm curious to see if that dynamic changes, if the Commanders can be good over the next decade, if people come back to this team.
So I've never necessarily, thought about being or becoming a Ravens fan. Loyalty, like with me, like runs deep. So, once I was like set on, the Commanders and, what we used to be called, I was never going to like waver. Granted, we do have a terrible owner, and it's not good sometimes, to separate, the owner from the franchise, but that's sort of kind of like what I did. I looked at the guys that were actually on the field, the guys that were out in the community, impacting me and, my friends as I grew up. So that's more so what I was more concerned with, as opposed to, upper management and things of that nature.
Right, but there's also the winning and the losing, because like that's the thing too, because like if you're 26, like you haven't seen a lot of winning, and that's the thing that I also am kind of like, wow, okay, because it's one thing to say like, oh, and especially if you're 12, you don't care who the owner is, right? If you're 15, you probably still don't care who the owner is, but you do care that your team sucks, and like they sucked for so much of it. And the Ravens, when you're, let's see, You're like 5, 6 years old. The Ravens win the Super Bowl. They're in it again when you're 15 or whatever, however old you were when they made it with Flacco. Like, I would imagine that your friends, because I'm sure you had friends that were Ravens fans by nature of living here. And that was the other thing too, is like, it's one thing if let's say you're a Chiefs fan and something weird happens and you all of a sudden are like, I don't think I can root for the Chiefs anymore. You're just picking another team. Like, there's another team that's close by. You're randomly going to root. I mean, the next geographic closest team might be the Cowboys. Like, that is, all right, especially now that the Rams are gone, like, you're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, think of who's in the Chiefs division. The Chiefs are in the AFC West with a team in Denver, which isn't particularly close, LA, and Seattle. Or no, not Seattle. That's the NFC West. Who's the other team in the AFC West? Chargers, Broncos, Raiders. Yeah, Vegas. So, you don't have another, if you live in suburban Kansas City, you can't get in the car and go to another NFL game. Especially for a lot of our listeners that are Maryland-based, you might be closer to M&T Bank than you are to FedEx anyway, depending on where you live in like a Howard County, let's say. You get up closer kind of halfway. If you're like in Laurel, I mean, Laurel's actually, I guess, pretty close to Landover, but like you get up a little bit north of that and you're not that far from M&T anyway. So I would imagine you had friends that were just like, yeah, I'm going to root for the team that's good. And it had nothing to do with ownership on the surface. It wasn't like Dan Snyder, bad man, not rooting for. It was like, hey, that team sucks and that team's good. I'm going to root for the good team. Because when you're 7, that's how you think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, Craig, growing up in D.C., there wasn't a lot of winning, across all sports.
That is also true.
I think I just had to, get used to it, like, losing and, like, not having, like, high expectations. But, the last couple of years, 2018, 2019, 2020, we've been seeing other teams, sort of kind of turn the tide a little bit and sort of start winning. So hopefully, with Dan on his way out the door, and I was actually talking to a Commanders fan as I was leaving the nail salon with my granddad. I took him to go get a pedicure.
I want to get that story in a second.
I had to go take him. But yeah, the Commanders fan, he was like, I hope we can finally, start winning, because that's literally the only sport in DC that isn't winning right now. I mean, aside from the Wizards. But everybody else, is winning on the field.
Yeah, or at least has one recently, right? Because, I mean, that's the other thing, too, is, I talked a lot over the last couple of years about the missed opportunity for the league, right? If they had pushed the envelope and figured out how to get Dan out right after he agreed to change the name. So you're no longer the old nickname. You're the Washington football team. All the stuff comes out, and you just Robert Sarver it. It's like, hey, man, you got to go. Like, or you Donald Sterling. Hey, man, you're suspended forever. So you can either get lost or live with a lifetime suspension. You're never allowed back in the stadium. You're never allowed in the practice facility. Your wife can run it if that's what you really want, but you, Dan Snyder, are suspended forever, and we'd really like for you to sell. They could have, if they had done something like that to force his hand, they could have restarted fresh then. But right now, from a sporting perspective, pretty good time for Josh Harris and Mitchell Rales to come in.
Yes, sir.
Because every other team is not doing great. You are at the best team performance-wise right now is the Capitals, who are struggling as much as they have in the last 20 years. And the Alex Ovechkin era is clearly nearing the end. It's who knows if it's this year, next year, the year after, but still very good, but he's at the end of his career. And it doesn't look like they really have a great path to being a championship level team. The Nationals stink the high heavens, are for sale, and aren't going to be good for a couple of years on purpose, even under best case scenario. And the Wizards are wizarding. They're floundering in mediocrity of nothingness. And so if you're the Commanders and you can be good, the way we already talk about them more than everyone else anyway, but can you imagine how they're going to capture the hearts and minds of this city if they win? Like, could you imagine, Anthony, think we come in like December, whatever of this year, and they're 10-4 going into the final stretch, 3 games of the season, and they're fighting for home field or, a division championship. Can you imagine what our phone lines will be like? Not just from like, hey, we're going to have a lot of calls, but like people are going to be overjoyed. Like they're not going to know what to do with themselves. It'd be incredible.
Craig, the first couple of home games, I promise you, are going to be sold out and packed. I promise you. I can almost guarantee it.
That's a good call.
Dan being gone?
I think Dan being gone, and if there's, rumblings coming out of training camp that Sam Howell is remotely good at football, yeah, FedEx is going to be packed.
I think people going to start, buying season tickets again. I mean, there were a couple of people that called yesterday, maybe not on your show or Chris's show, but people are definitely talking about getting season tickets again and,
oh yeah,
restoring that passion that they once had for, the franchise.
No doubt about it. We'll take some calls on that later in the show. 301-230-0980. Clinton Yates joins us, though, for his Friday visit next. The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. So Clinton Yates scheduled to join us now, and he is joining us now. And all I could see in the break was Haney just giggling his face off in the producer's studio. What's going on here?
Let's just say we were having a conversation that only happens at the cookout, and some of you were not invited to today's cookout. So that's that. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, damn. I'll have to see if I get my invite in the commercial break.
You've gotten plenty of invites. You just didn't get one today. So how are you?
I'm good. We've had nothing to talk about here. Are you okay with me not sending you a rundown for today's appearance? Do you figure out what we're talking about?
I think today's going to work out just fine. So,
all right.
For those of you who don't know, I got on Craig last week because we're flying blind completely on these segments now, which is how it should be. Welcome to Radio Kiddos.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about, sir?
I would like to know your reaction when you saw the news yesterday that Daniel Snyder had agreed in principle to sell the Washington Commanders to Josh Harris.
I think about it in the context of something that's a little bit more relatable to a regular life situation, which is that, like, you know that dude that you knew in high school that went off and, like, dated and married the uber annoying person who you just could not deal with. You kind of gritted your teeth during college. As soon as they started having a bunch of kids who turned out to be obnoxious as well, you totally distanced themselves. And then this guy shows back up at the family reunion like, oh, I divorced her, and I got the kids. You're like, bro, I'm already disinterested. You've already ruined the lives of a bunch of other people, and you've wasted your own time with all of this. That's kind of how I feel about this announcement now. Don't get me wrong. I understand for on-the-ground Commanders fans, this is the step that he had to take. But these 25 years have been long, Gregory. And there are many people like myself who not as only are completely disassociated with the franchise, but in some levels they're almost disassociated with the NFL football as well, because that team was the only real reason they liked the league to begin with. So, yes, it's a great thing. Rejoice. But the number of people that are still hanging out in this squad, diehards or not, has decreased to the point that you have to pay attention to that. It's good for the league that he's out of the league. It's good for the city that he's out of the league. And most importantly, it's good for all those people that had their careers and lives upended by Daniel M. Snyder, that they finally get some sort of, I don't want to say restitution, because the guy's going to make $1 billion plus getting out of there, but finally, the bad guy's gone.
Yeah, no, definitely. What was your breaking point? What was the point where you're like, I am out on this franchise, and how much directly did it have to do with Daniel M. Snyder?
You know, I've written about this back when I was at the Washington Post, and it wasn't even necessarily anything related to what he did in terms of timing. It was a two-part thing. Number one, when 2-1 Sean Taylor died, a lot of my love for NFL football died with him. I was working at Washington Post Express. I remember that 2 days like it was yesterday. I fought hard to make sure that even his shooting got on the front page of the paper, and he died the following, I believe it was the following morning, and we did 2 straight covers of Sean Taylor. And after all that emotion came out of me, and then they lost the game to the Bills, in which Joseph Jackson Gibbs called 2 timeouts that pushed them out of field goal range, and they missed a kick. It was a whole thing. And I was just like, first of all, why am I thinking about what the football result is here? I don't even care. Second of all, my favorite football player of all time is no longer with the team. And on top of that, he's in the ground. That's when things change for me on a personal level. On a professional and a public level, it was when my dad was like, yo, we don't do this anymore in this house. I don't want you wearing the gear. I don't want you buying it for your kid brother. That's just not what we do. And we almost came to blows over it. Because I was like, hold up. You're the one that took me to RFK. You're the reason why I was at every single home game the last time that team was any good in 91-92 season. Reminder, I was at RFK at all those games as a 10-year-old. It was my introduction to the league. I was at the seat cushion game. And I was like, how could you possibly say that we're not doing this anymore? And looked me dead in my eyes and he said, because we're not doing it anymore. This guy is just not what we operate as. And I was like, okay. You know, and after that, it was kind of like, I'll figure out my own way in terms of how I want to deal with using the word of the previous team's name professionally and so on and so forth. But after that, I was just kind of like, this is not fun anymore. And guess what? They suck too. How about that?
There is that. We actually were just talking about that as well for like people that are Anthony's age, that are a little bit younger than me, a little younger than you, that they grew up and they didn't have the 91-92. They didn't have any of the good. They just, whether they were aware of all the ownership stuff or not, they just knew the team stunk. And like that is another thing that I'm curious to see how quickly it can turn around. Clinton Yates is our guest from ESPN, of course, Washington, D.C. native here on the Hoffman Show. How quickly do you think they, and this is obviously an ownership and a football question, like how quickly can they turn it around enough that like the fan base looks something that resembles what it used to be and that they can be a team that is looked at seriously in the NFL?
Trey, I know with your lavish radio lifestyle, you take a lot of luxury cruises on super yachts. Have you ever seen a super yacht turn around in a port? It takes a while, okay? It takes a while. You got to get out there, you got to turn around, you got to make it back, you got to make sure nobody else is there. I just think that the way the NFL moves now, it's going to be really difficult to ascertain when you're going to get another quality product. We had a couple flashes in the pan in terms of we, the people of D.C., who claim to be, at one point, fans of that football team, but, like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get a good quarterback in this league these days. It's even harder to get a decent head coach these days. And getting people back to a stadium like that, which is the worst in the league, arguably, that's going to be difficult. This is another long-term project. And I don't say that to be, sort of sky is falling chicken little. I just mean, reminder, a change in ownership does not mean your team automatically gets better. Not even close. It just means that you don't have the guilt of dealing with somebody who was, an outright, I don't want to use this word, but kind of a scumbag, and that's where you've got to sort of settle yourself if you're a fan of the Commanders. Are you happy with just being an above-board program before you get upset about not winning anything? I think the latter is going to take a lot longer to come than people are willing to admit, simply because the NFL is that good these days, and that's been the issue with the franchise to begin with. Not only are you losing, you're setting yourself back in terms of advancement of the product.
Right. Well, and then it just depends. I mean, you're probably right, but also if Sam Howell's good, they'll be good this year. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
like,
but, I mean, Sam Howell, by the way, has gotten a couple of cookout invites, if you know what I'm saying. And listen to that brother when he talks. You know what I mean? You get an idea of where he operates down in North Carolina where he played. So I just think that it's difficult because everything is so hit or miss in the NFL these days, and half of that is scouting departments and coaching. And what has been the biggest dearth on this team, besides the ownership and besides the ability of players to get together, they just haven't had top tier, in my opinion, instruction that's been in leadership positions. Had a lot of guys come through young that have gone to other places and succeeded, but it's not easy to do that when you're a stay-at-home.
No, and part of that is an infrastructure thing, right? Like you don't pay the scouts, you don't get the best scouts. That said, the Bengals don't pay anybody. They, for years, have been the cheapest team in the league by a mile. They got Joe Burrow, and now they're awesome. So, them's the breaks sometimes. Clint Yates with us from ESPN, of course, here on the Team 980. I know we've talked about this, but to kind of now that this is a top of mind, like next on the to-do list issue, aka potentially first on the to-do list for Josh Harris, how important is it in your mind that the stadium returns to the District of Columbia, RFK site or otherwise?
I actually think this is the biggest hurdle this franchise has to figure out, well beyond whether or not they're successful or not. And the hurdle they're going to have to figure out is a different District of Columbia from a resident standpoint, from a leadership and government standpoint, and I mean not locally, than they were dealing with when this deal first got negotiated to leave and go to Maryland. Like, the DC of 2023 does not want a NFL football team for 8 to 10 weeks a season, if you're including the preseason, and we're not presuming the playoffs, Gregory, just to say that they have it. I don't believe that is what most of the populace is looking for. And so, sure, in some sort of fever dream retrospect thing, it would be great. But RFK federal land, all of that area around there could probably be used for other things that are better. If we're really thinking about who the fan base of this team is, Virginia is probably a better option. That doesn't mean that I think it has to be the case. It doesn't mean that I'm rooting for that, but let's be real about sort of the urbanism that's developed over the last 10 years and what's happening regionally. It seems like it would be a very odd move to suddenly move a very bad franchise back to the middle, not the middle, but back to Central City just because you wanted to. That doesn't seem to make a lot of economic sense to me right now, even if the emotional heartstrings are there to be tugged. I don't know what's going to happen to that. That's a bigger question mark than even the quarterback position, to be honest.
No, it is. I don't know. I go back and forth on this too, and it's hard because like you and I live in a very sports-centric world, and by the nature of our jobs, even strangers that talk to us are like, hey, what do you think about this? And it's like, okay, well, everyone I talk to pretty much has a sports tilt. But I think you make a good point. And like I would say, obviously, most people listening also have a sports tilt. You're listening to a sports radio station. So most of your friends probably are like, hell yeah, I want to see, even if you're a DC resident, even if you live over in that neighborhood, which a lot more people do now than obviously they used to when there was a football stadium and all the things around it. There's more housing and everything over there. So, if that's the case, then they're like, yeah, of course I want the stadium over there. But I do think you're probably right that there's a group of people that are not going to be heard from on sports radio until this thing is potentially in motion and there's like public hearings on it that could create a level of pushback that pushes this stadium somewhere else. I would say the problem though, Clinton, is like geographically, I don't know where makes sense outside of RFK. Like RFK actually is a really good site for geography purposes. It's centralized. It lets the Virginia people come. It lets the Maryland people come. It lets the DC people come. There's metro access. I don't know where else in the DMV has all of those boxes checked.
I don't mean to burn your show on fire here, but this is also one of the reasons why I just sort of in a thought experiment, I brought this up many moons ago, Gregory, which is that I don't necessarily know what the DMV is the best place for a football team right now because of that situation. That's a separate discussion, but I do think that, no, if you're looking at available options, none of them are good. And that's a completely separate matter that I think about. Like, if you're going to create something, I don't know that what you want to create at RFK is centralized around an NFL team. That's what I'm saying here. It's not necessarily about whether or not one side is better than the other. The question is what happens for the city. Reminder, not everybody cares about football. And reminder, football only happens a certain amount of weeks of the year. And so it is easy to assume in the sports realm that you're discussing that the city is just going to sort of acquiesce to whatever works. I just don't know that that's real. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't know that it's real, that it's worth having if you're, I don't know, a parent with a nice house, the banger sleepover party every other week in your basement if your rest of your house is doing just fine. It's a very, very difficult process, and I think if the next owner comes in, the smartest move they can make is on what's going to be the real estate establishment between the team. Forget about the front office of the squad. Where you play is how you're going to build your fan base back. I think even more so than whether or not you even win games.
Yeah, I would say I disagree that like the DMV in general is a very large area because you're not going to find a better market. And I do think that the passion and a lot of that stuff will come back. And there's so many people here that clearly like you're not going to make any more money anywhere else. But it's worth pointing.
We care about that, but everybody else doesn't have to care about that. You know what I mean? That's what local flavor is. That's all I mean.
Well, yeah, but what I was going to say is that also doesn't mean that something like what happened in San Francisco isn't going to happen either. Where, like, the stadium, for people that don't know, in San Francisco, ain't anywhere close to San Francisco. Like, I'm sure you've been to it. I haven't had a chance. That's one of the ones that I've missed. But, like, Santa Clara is very far from San Francisco. Like, we're talking like an hour plus, depending on traffic, 45 minutes at least on a great day. And so when people talk about like the Woodbridge site, I think that's way more realistic than maybe folks realize. And in the same way that like if you live in Oakland or areas in northern San Francisco, you got the entire city and a bunch of suburbs between you and the stadium and you're just kind of SOL, that might be what happens here.
Shout to the Dumfries, though. I'm going to keep going now. I mean, yeah. But like at the same time, I'm just saying like, the new ownership, the ding-dong, the queen is dead, that doesn't mean that we just fall back to go-go bands outside of RFK and the crowd rocking. That's not what that means. That is still in the past in our mind. We can still live that if we want to. The future will look nothing like that. Trust me on that one, kiddos.
Do you think Game 1 this year will be sold out?
Yes, I do. But I think it will be the only sold-out game of the season, provided they are not above 500 for every other single one. I think that will be the de facto parade, if you will. It's a parade in my city. You know, that's the meme that's going around. I think the first home game, the home opener, regular season, not the preseason, will be the de facto, presuming this goes through by then, that is the sale. I think that will be the de facto celebration day. Tailgate and all that. Heck, your boy might even show up for that one, Gregory.
Wow. Oh, all right, Anthony, put that down in the book.
It's a parade inside my city.
He knows what I'm talking about.
Of course. All right. Anything else you would like to add on this momentous historic week in Washington D.C. sports?
No, other than a lot of people in town have reached out to me, and I would be lying if I didn't say that I thought it was going to be bigger in terms of celebration. It's more so relief, but relief is better than heartburn.
That is true. I agree with you on that. I've actually been surprised, but I also think there's some, like, I don't know. I've now tortured this analogy because I made it yesterday and now keep bringing it back. But it's like he's dead. We just need to have the funeral, and until the funeral happens, we're not there. I could probably go an engaged, married thing, but the funeral one seems more fun.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Talk to you soon, guys.
All right. See you, buddy. Bye.
Bye. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend. Clinton Yates, everybody, with us on the Team 980. When we get back, some reaction to all that. And then Mark Schlereth is going to join us coming up at 5 o'clock. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Hope everyone's having a great Friday, celebrating the news. Dan Snyder has agreed to sell the Commanders to the Harris Rails Group for $6 billion, Anthony Haney. Just following up, we were talking about with Yates real quick on the, I do think that the first game is going to be the celebration. Champagne in the parking lot, confetti cannons. I wonder how much the team does. If you're Josh Harris, you're not out there necessarily trying to rub it in everybody's face, but you do want to say hey, this is a new era. And so I do wonder what kind of things, presuming that Jason Wright is still in charge, Jason and his team come up with on the marketing side. But I think we were talking in the break, if you're the NFL, putting that game in prime time is a freaking no-brainer. That's going to be a sellout. Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, one of the two. I doubt you make it the opener because I think that's a little bit too much of an admission by the NFL that we're celebrating this guy's gone. Hey, Kansas City, we know you won the Super Bowl, and traditionally the champions get to host on Thursday night to open the season, but Washington really was the biggest winner of the last 12 months, so they're going to get it. But I do think it's a slam dunk Sunday night or Monday Night Football game.
Yeah, I mean, also, you were just talking about, the pressure that it might put on Josh Harris and, the group just to have, just for the opener, they're resetting everything, what kind of culture and things of that nature. So how they going to get the fans involved? I think that they're going to have their hands full, but I think if they want to, hit the ground running hard, I think the home opener is definitely how you get everybody out there. And then, the fans ultimately going to come along as well.
Yeah, and then I think Clinton's right to an extent. I think it's somewhere between what you said and what Clinton said. You said 2 segments ago or whatever it was that you think every game this season will be sold out. Just people will be excited. Clinton says, the first one, and then it'll depend on how good they are. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think fans are going to buy tickets ahead of time the first month or so of the season. The weather's nice. The hope is there for how... If they stink the high heavens for a month, yeah, people are going to stop showing up. And I don't know that it'll get as bad as it has been the last couple of years, but I also think there is a reality that we're talking about pro sports here, and going to games is expensive, and who knows if they'll change the modules or the kind of the models for how they charge for tickets, for parking, for concessions. There's a lot of stuff that the business folks have to go through and decide, what does the game experience look like? I think if they're smart, this is a topic that we should write down for next week is what about the game experience would you change? If you get invited to a fan forum, what would you tell Jason Wright and Josh Harris and, whoever winds up being in charge of all of these things on whatever level of the organization that is running this fake fan forum that we're doing? But I do think that is the kind of thing that you have to think about. Is what is the experience like going to a game? Because the Dan Snyder experience stunk. It's way overpriced. Parking's a disaster. They can't move the stadium. That part's still going to be bad, and the parking itself is going to be bad, but they cannot charge as much. And so there's things like that I think are going to affect all of it as well. And I think the general hope is going to help make it a better place to be for pretty much the entire season. But at the end of the day, if it's December and they're the season was shot because Howell actually wasn't good and Brissett or whatever combination of bad things happen, and they're 5-10 week 15, it's not going to be full at FedEx because people are psyched about the owner. Because at that point, it's a pro sports team that's bad late in the season and it's cold outside, and that makes them no different than Cleveland or Cincinnati or the Jets or Buffalo or anybody else north of the Mason-Dixon line in December that's had a bad season in the last entire history of the NFL. Yeah. So there's that. Yeah. We'll come back to this because we got to break because Schlereth's next. But Mark Schlereth is going to join us, Fox NFL analyst, of course, one of the Hogs, a 3-time Super Bowl champ. Fox analyst has said that, I think. Local radio out in Denver, too, so he's got perspective on a recent ownership change. Stink joins us next here on The Hoffman Show. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Typically 5 o'clock, not my beat. We're going to move that back to 5:30 today and talk with Michael Phillips. So that is coming up in just a little bit. But right now it is our pleasure to welcome in Mark Schlereth, three-time Super Bowl champ, NFL analyst with Fox. Of course, played for the Commanders or for Washington from 89 to 94. Stink, welcome to the show, man. Glad to have you.
It's great to be with you, man. Thanks for having me.
You are. We were texting earlier to set this up, and like the Venn diagram of experiences that you have is great because not only all the things I just said relative to Washington and being successful in the NFL, but you also just went through this in Denver with an ownership change. So we'll circle back to that in a second. But first, simply, what was your reaction when you heard the news that Dan Snyder was finally not going to be the owner of the Washington Commanders anymore?
Oh, man, I was so excited because Dan Snyder, in my opinion, is a turd. So in one of my life experiences, just don't be a turd. Like, that is one of the things I believe in. And I'm so glad that he is gone. And I'm so glad that the Washington Commanders can have new ownership and experience that. And, you know, I mean, I love Ron Rivera. I think Ron Rivera is a really good man. And I think he's a great man to lead the franchise forward. But I just thought that, you know, that organization deserves to be a crown jewel in the NFL, you know, in the NFL, and they haven't been since he took over ownership, and so I'm just glad that they're moving on, and that they, like I said, and I've said many times before, welcome back to the NFL, Washington Commanders. I'm excited for you.
Can you compare your experience as an alum of this organization over the last 25 years compared to the way that you've been treated by the Broncos organization as an alum?
Not really. I mean, recently it's been really good with Washington. You know, I live in Denver. I do national television stuff and call games and have a radio show here in Denver. So oftentimes in Denver, you know, I can step on some toes because the one thing about me is I'll be blunt as a spoon, and I'm going to tell you exactly what the truth is. And sometimes, you know, organizations don't really like that. But recently with Washington, it's been great. It really has. They've really made a huge effort under Ron Rivera and under Jason Wright and several of the other people over there in that organization to really bring back the alumni and to really have them involved in the organization, which I appreciate. I came out there last spring and spoke at the rookie symposium they put together, and you know, they've been really good with stuff like that. So I'm thankful for that. You know, like I said, often because of what I do for a living, I can be abrasive or I can hurt some feelings. But the bottom line is as a player, you know, I treat it just like I did as a player. When you had me as part of your organization as a player, you expected 100% effort, 100% preparation. You expected me to do my job without fail, to go out and play hurt, to play injured, to do all those things. Why would you expect any less from me as a member of the media? Like, shame on you. That's a you problem. That's not a me problem. So yeah, sometimes, like I said, here in Denver, I can get myself into a little hot water, but whatever, it doesn't bother me.
Mark Schlereth, Fox, of course, NFL analyst, with us here on the Team 980. On the Snyder front, one more thing real quick, and then I do want to spin it forward to what you think this organization looks like moving forward. But when was the first time you remember developing an opinion on Snyder? Like, was there an event that kind of started to make you go like, wow,
yes,
don't think this guy's very good?
Yeah, I went back for Darryl Green's 40th birthday party, and we were both still playing in the league. Obviously, Darryl was a dear friend of mine, and I was sitting at a table, and Daniel Snyder was sitting beside me. It was, you know, name tags, and that's where we were assigned seating, and asked me questions about free agent football players for 30 minutes. Got up in the corner, went to the corner of the room, got on a cell phone, made a call, 35, 40 minutes, comes back to the table, and I jokingly say, "Did you trade for me?" And he just looked at me like, "How dare you speak to me?" And he turned his back to me and didn't speak to me the rest of the evening.
Wow. That's
so,
so perfectly
you know
on
what?
brand.
He can kiss my ass as far as I'm concerned.
So Mark Schlereth here saying good riddance to Daniel Snyder on the team 980. Stink, as you mentioned, you're Denver based now, and you guys just went through the ownership change out there over the last year. How quickly did you start to see things change, and how quickly can an ownership group impact how successful a football team is?
Well, I watched them kind of try to immerse themselves in the business of football, and they did a really good job of understanding, hey, we don't necessarily know football. We know the business side of it. So let us immerse ourselves in the football side of it and get as much information as we can, and reach out to as many people as we can about this game, and kind of take it on that kind of path. And then obviously when things were just not going well here, and they had a game against the Rams where they lost, I think 51-14 or something of that nature. And then they started firing people. And since then they've been talking about redesigning uniforms. They've been talking about a new stadium. They put out a bunch of questionnaires for their fan base about new stadiums and what's important and this, that, and the other, and been really working toward and with the fan base to figure those things out. And then obviously going through this coaching search and going out and getting a real live NFL football coach who's an adult that can hold people accountable, and most importantly, hold the investment accountable that you made in your quarterback, who really played as poorly as anybody I've ever seen play in the league last year in Russell Wilson. So they've made a lot of, in my mind and estimation, really smart football decisions, and really hired smart football people, and empowered those people. One of the issues I think that Washington has had for a very long time since Daniel Snyder took over is one thing to hire people and appoint people, and there's another thing to empower people. And when you hire a coach, that coach needs to be empowered. And if he isn't, well, you automatically emasculate him before he walks into the facility. And I think that's something that is a real issue, or has been a real issue in Washington. I also think it happens to be a real issue in Dallas. I think there's some problems there. So one of the things that I've seen here in Denver with the new ownership group is they appointed a coach and they've empowered him, where before they got there, they hired a quarterback and empowered him to basically, tell the coach what he wanted to run and how he wanted to run it. And I mean, that hierarchy, if you don't have it squared away, it will never work. And that's one of the reasons I think Washington had fallen on such hard times under Daniel Snyder.
You mentioned that you are a big fan of Ron Rivera, someone who actually has been fairly empowered here. Obviously, a lot of fans here have been frustrated because they haven't been over 500 during his tenure. So what is it that you like about Rivera that you still think he's the right guy moving forward for Washington?
One, he is a great man that will hold his players accountable. And I think that's really important. Now, obviously, you've got to rectify and fix the quarterback situation. And, as much as we all loved Heineke, and he's so exciting and he's fun to hang around and stuff, there's a ceiling from just a pure talent standpoint that I think you saw over the course of time, and that's not a Rivera issue. And then with Carson Wentz, I mean, that is a guy that has been beaten down so much. You only have so many sacks and so many hits, I think, that you can absorb before, that's all you see. And so I feel bad for Carson, because I think Carson's a really good man. He's a really good kid. But, I think his time in Philly beat him up, beat him down. There was a year in Philly in 2020, they took 50-some-odd sacks. Or maybe more than that, 60 sacks. I mean, he just got the snot beat out of him. And, that experiment didn't work. And I feel bad for him for that reason. But bottom line, like I said, I think he understands football. He knows kind of what he wants the identity to be of the football team, which I think is a huge attribute to any head coach, of being able to say, this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to win football games and get everybody on board. And I think he has that ability to get people on board that way.
Mark Schlereth, Fox NFL analyst, with us for just a few more quick minutes here on the Hoffman Show. Speaking of coaches who are notorious for holding players accountable, what do you make of the acquisition of Eric Bieniemy for Washington this offseason?
Yeah, I like it. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see kind of what offense he brings, and obviously under Andy Reid all these years and the way they have operated with Patrick Mahomes and just the pure talent you have on the outside. It will be really exciting to see how that offense functions and the way they go about that. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes makes up for a multitude of sins. So you don't have that guy, so. But I'm excited to see what Eric Bieniemy, brings. And, he's a vitriolic dude, from, I don't really know him, but, from what I understand, like, he'll get after folks. And, ultimately, I love it. I mean, that's how I was coached my whole life. So I think that's a great thing. And we'll just see how guys respond to it.
I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you on the way out. You got any other Dan stories you want to unload?
No, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
Like everybody you talk to has a Dan Snyder story of him just being an absolute turd. So that's all you can say. And I'm just being honest. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I mean, that's his job. Like that's what he does. So whatever. Like no, I don't have any. I think I pretty much summed it up for you.
No, the summary was. I mean, look, every story that I hear, it's like both the details are incredible and completely unsurprising at the same time. Because you're right, everyone has one. It's just like, wow, there are so many of them. And when you get the stories themselves, as you well know, stories make for great radio. So trust me, Mark, I got the gist. I just didn't know if you had any more specifics that you wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I mean, I came back for. I think it was our 25th reunion of Super Bowl 26. And Washington did a phenomenal job of hosting us. It was fun. It was a great reunion to see all the guys that you played with and everything else. He invited me to sit in the box with he and his wife, which I declined because I have no interest in sitting with him. Why would I want to sit with you? But then, then it was different because then I had a television career and, and then it would have, I don't know, maybe it was a benefit at that point. But, yeah, no interest. No, thank you.
Yeah, well, you don't have to worry about it next time. You see if Josh Harris invites you into his box. Although typically I guess you're in the broadcast booth these days. So, maybe Josh will come visit you and Adam.
I did get to come down and call the game, and Washington was unbelievable. The organization was great. They called Fox and basically asked Fox if I could do the Cleveland game because they were honoring the Hogs. And they rolled out the red carpet. And it was absolutely phenomenal, and I was proud to be, part of the organization, proud to be honored. And Joe Gibbs was there, and Russ Grimm and Jeff Bostic and Mark Rippon and Doug Williams, and it was just tremendous. It was such a great reunion. Good to see Coach Gibbs again. And I got to, be out there honored before the game. And then I did my booth hit from the sideline, which was really cool. It was great, but that was Washington reaching out to Fox, begging to have me call the game. So I thought that was a really cool thing that they did. And it just goes to show you there's a lot of good people in that organization that want things done the right way. And hopefully, like I said, Washington rises back to the place of prominence that it deserves and where it belongs.
No doubt about it. Hopefully we'll see you again a couple times this fall. Always great to have you and Adam on the call. Mark Schlereth, everybody, calling us from Denver, Fox NFL analyst, local radio host there in Denver, and, of course, a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Mark, this was great. We'll definitely have you back, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right, it's Mark Schlereth, everybody. Hey, Anthony. Do you think the digital folks are gonna want the part where Mark called Dan turd? Do we think that?
Are you talking about this part?
Yeah.
Opinion's a turd.
Yeah. I think that one might get a few clicks. I think some folks are going to be like, "Whoa!" Also,
you need to put that on our board as I think you need to put it on your board as well.
ooh, that's a good call.
Yeah, that's why I sent it to you.
You already sent it to me?
Yeah, I sent it to
Sweet. So we're going to be able to update the board. Oh, hold on. We want to unpair that. We want to let's see, because I got obviously on Fridays we're operating from home, so we got the home board. What do we have on the home board? We don't need Dave's intro anymore, at least for now.
Is on there.
Yeah, we got JD McKissick. We got Doug. We got the breaking news sound. We got Craig Melvin after the We Are the Commanders. So we can go combo, or we can just go solo. And now, Anthony, I don't have it on the board yet, so I'm going to need you to play it. But we also now have...
The turd.
I think we need to expand it out a little bit. It feels like it's cut off.
Snyder, in my opinion, is a turd.
Yeah. I just don't know how much usage... Like, in a way, we're going to... Like, we need to use it in the next, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Because then Dan's gone.
Yeah.
We're going to retire that one, and we're going to retire... I don't have it on this board, but we're going to have to retire that, and I'm on a boat.
Oh, yeah. Dang.
I know. I feel like we need to abuse... I mean, maybe Dan will come back up. Some of the investigations will come to light, and they'll be like, they tried to serve Dan another subpoena, and Dan's sailing around. And we can play I'm on a boat.
You know how Russ... And I don't want to really bite off Russell, but in a situation where, somebody is acting turdish-like, maybe you drop it.
Yeah, no, we could definitely do that. All right, speaking of breaking news... I don't know how much we'll do on this the rest of the day, considering everything else going on, but the Capitals have parted ways with Peter Laviolette, their head coach. So we don't really have a lot of details at this time, but the Capitals and head coach Peter Laviolette have agreed to part ways. Brian McClellan, the GM, says, "We are grateful for Peter's leadership and dedication to our organization for the last 3 seasons." So Capitals will be looking for their third coach since the Stanley Cup. That's crazy because that was not that long ago. That was 2019. Capitals will be looking for their third coach since then because they let Barry Trotz go. And then Todd Reardon, not so good. And then Peter Laviolette, yikes, bro. So when Ovi breaks Gretzky's record, be under a new coach. That's Anthony. We're about reaching the end of my hockey analysis here.
I was wondering how much analysis there was going to be towards it.
Not much.
Yeah, that is interesting though. I mean, Trotz also being fired after we have won it, that shocked me.
It was crazy.
I'm a casual hockey fan, but I would never expect the coach to get fired literally after we won the Stanley Cup. So that was shocking. And then Reardon and Laviolette. Laviolette, I think I followed a little bit closely since I've been home, graduated from college. And even his stint was a little weird. I thought we were building something, and then he ended up breaking it all down, sending people this and that away. So.
Yeah, the NHL is a tough league, man, because the salary cap is super restrictive. I think they've got it's a much harder cap, if not a straight up hard cap. So building a roster and maintaining it, you get stars, great. You have young players that come up and you're like, sweet, we got young guys on cheap deals. Oh crap, they need a veteran contract. And it's really hard to keep a team together. And that's a little bit of what Washington had, but it's weird because you now look back at 2019 and you go, or 2018, 2019 was the Nats. Yes, the years that were so good that you can't remember which team won the championship. 2018, when the Caps won, that looks like the aberration now. That looks like they got lucky for a year. But I do think also you look back at the 20-year history essentially of Ovechkin, and you're like, man, they should have had more than one.
Yep.
For as good as he is. So, I don't know, man. It's a weird... It is the kind of thing that Ovechkin's so good and has been for so long that he's kind of bought Ted some cushion on that side of things. And I think that's like an important thing to point out when we talk about like Ted with the Wizards, and he gets crushed there, and people are like, well, is he actually that bad because of the Caps? And it's like, it's one of those where would they actually been better with someone else running it? I don't know. It's hard. I mean, they had so many good teams. Like, what are you supposed to do? Be better than being the 1 seed? No, they just didn't execute when it came playoff time. They catch a hot goaltender here. They catch a whatever there. They have their own goaltending issues some years. But ultimately, be yet another coach for Ovi as Peter Laviolette and the Capitals have agreed to part ways. Not what we're talking about next. Michael Phillips is going to join us for Not My Beat. Shifted back to 5:30 today. Then our good friend Field Yates joins us coming up at 6. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live as well on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. All right, typically 5 o'clock, we bring in an expert on the top story of the day. Today we had Schlereth, who needed that 5 o'clock slot, and Mark was incredible, told fantastic stories, and called Dan Snyder a turd. So we decided we would shift back to 5:30 for Not My Beat and welcome in our guy, Michael Phillips. So let's hit it, shall we?
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in. Not My Beat.
Michael Phillips, Richmond Times-Dispatch with us. Miguel, what a week. What a week.
What a week. What a day. What a week. What a month it's going to be. You just feel it in the air. It's not just the pollen. It's also the excitement.
It's the Josh Harris in the air.
Yes.
It is kind of a weird thing because in a way it's anticlimactic because we've been slow rolling towards this. Like this collision has been like, oh, we're gonna hit. Oh, we're gonna hit. Boom. And that yesterday was the boom. It's like, oh wow, we did it. But when you heard the news, whether it was seeing Sportico's tweet or whatever confirmation work you did, like as someone who's covered this team for a long time, like what is your reaction now that the Dan Snyder era is essentially over?
Yeah, I mean, you think about moments along the way, and one of them was when this was, we're two and a half years ago now, the Adam Schefter statement, they're going to review the name. That was what was like, whoa, like that's a big moment. These are moments leading up to this. Like that one was a jaw dropper for me. I didn't think he'd ever change the name. Him changing the name tells me everything's on the table from there. November, the Forbes report, he's considering selling the team. I mean, you assume you know where that's going to go, but there's still skepticism. And then probably about January, I had made peace with he's going to sell the team. It's going to happen. You knew that from talking to people. We all understood he was going to sell the team. The Bezos news was probably the biggest news of the week for me because we couldn't read Bezos. There was no. I was unaware of anybody who had an inside line to Bezos, and if they were, they certainly weren't reporting it out. He was a mystery the whole way, all the way until he bailed earlier this week. And so once he bailed, I think we knew there was one group left. It was a matter of accepting that offer. And look, we're in the semantics here of it's a non-exclusive offer. Somebody please show up with more money. But it's done. It's going to be these guys. It's going to happen, ideally mid-May. I can tell you this. A lot of people over the years have said to me, wow, Dan Snyder must be really good for business. You've always got something to talk about. And as you know, that is not true at all. The very best thing for business, Craig, would be you and me at a Super Bowl talking about the team we cover participating in that game. You'd see the crowds every Sunday. They're sparse. We've got to get those crowds back, got to get the winning back. That is what's good for business. And so I think we all mutually celebrate this as an opportunity to move closer to that goal.
That is 100%. Like, who is having a better time? The sports editor of the paper in Kansas City or you? Who's having the better time? My good friends at 610 Sports in Kansas City or us? I'd rather be them. That's for sure. They've got Patrick Mahomes and Super Bowl trophies.
When you walk into a locker room to conduct interviews, you can tell within 30 seconds, even if you've never been there before, whether that team is winning or losing. Everything just, everything's better. Everybody's more friendly. Everybody's more open to telling you their stories. The stories are better. Why are there so many better stories about guys on winning teams? Because they're cool with it. Like, they're willing to spend the time with you and tell those stories because they won't be, oh my gosh, how could he tell his story? He needs to be watching more film. It's better for everybody when there's winning.
Michael Phillips, Richmond Times-Dispatch, with us here on the Team 980. This is, of course, the Hoffman Show. All right, let's go through some timeline stuff because you've been around for a lot of it, especially the latter half covering the team. Like, when to you did it really change? And by change, I mean the stadium stopped being full. The vitriol towards the team turned up, and the apathy of it, like, eventually it was vitriol first and then it was apathy. Like, when did those three things happen? When did it turn from like, oh, this is annoying, to vitriol? When did the vitriol turn to apathy? And then at what point in that process did the stadium start to empty out the way you remember it?
Yeah, and so Vinny Serrato was the GM for the first decade, and then Bruce Allen comes in for the second decade, and we I think probably bought more than we should have. Dan has learned his lessons. Things will be good now. They draft RG3. They draft Robert. And, I mean, let's high point it here. They beat the Dallas Cowboys to make the playoffs at the end of the 2012 season. That is your high point. That everybody left that stadium that night thinking, whew, he's got it. It took a decade. It was a rough decade, but he milked us as human ATMs for a decade, and I didn't appreciate that, and I didn't appreciate the losing. But we've got it. We're there. I'm excited. I'm on board with this. And then when that unraveled over the next year, you bounce back with, and here's Kirk Cousins, and here's this. The saviors they trotted out were progressively less impressive. And so that was,
you could argue Kirk was actually the high point.
Sure, from an actual football standpoint. From a fan standpoint, it was Robert because they believed. They believed that this was finally pointed in the right direction. And then when they realized it wasn't, it was, all right, I'm done believing this guy. He's cried wolf too many times. I'm waiting for this thing to turn around. And it just never did, and it just never did. And then obviously your moments you're pointing to are the New York Times had the cheerleader story, the Washington Post had, of course, the story from inside the building. And then equally important, you start COVID, and Dan angers the minority shareholders, the three guys who owned 40% of the team, and they turn on him. And I think that's your big, that was the point of no return when three powerful billionaires decided they didn't like him and they needed revenge on him. At that point, you had the FedEx statement. You had the brokered negotiation with the league. At that point, we had hit the point of no return. We didn't know when this day would come, but we knew we were flying towards it.
Yeah, definitely. A moment that I'll never forget is what turned out to be the last game before the pandemic, the 2019 Eagles game, end of the season. And I left the press box for a little bit to go say hi to a friend, and they happened to be sitting in like the suite section in like the 300. So I was decently high up, and they were in the end zone. So I had like a nice view straight forward of the stadium. And I remember realizing at that point, because you can, like, the press box is low enough that you can't really see a lot, and it's at this, like, it's in a corner, so there's only so much of the actual stadium you can see. And leaving the press box and having that vantage point of a full field view of 85 to 90% green jerseys, I was like, whoa! Like, this at that point, I knew Bruce Allen was getting fired, the next week. Like, that was done. To think that would also eventually kind of lead in a way to where we are too, because you've been covering the stadium as closely as anybody. And I think that's going to be obviously the next big project for Harris. But I was actually just an hours ago, I hopped in one of the Twitter spaces that the fans are doing. I was like, people need to understand the reports and the investigations mattered. The season ticket sales stuff mattered. Everything mattered. Like, different owners that were willing to eventually push him out if it came to that. Obviously, we're now at a point where it didn't. But all those different things eventually added up to him not really having a choice but to sell if he wanted to at least make money off of him getting essentially kicked out of the league.
You've got so many alternate realities where he still owns the team today, or still owns the team after this transaction closes. One, he gets the stadium deal done in Virginia, which was really close. Much closer than people realize. If he gets a stadium deal done, the other owners aren't kicking him out. And he gets that revenue stream and he can maybe pay back the loan. Number two is he doesn't alienate the minority owners, obviously. You look back along the way. And I think number three, and I don't say this flippantly, but I just say this, I think if he had dug his heels in on the name and made it an us versus them, he could have just become an Al Davis-like character. And not to say that any of this would be better by any stretch, but I think that might have staved off the inevitable.
That's interesting, though, because I do think he would have lost a lot of money. Like, I think the Nike and the FedEx stuff was real. And at that point, for a guy who was already in financial trouble, like, he'd be cutting off his nose to spite his face and then be like, well, cool, I'm the Pharaoh.
He would have absolutely, like you talk about dying on the hill, he would be dead on the hill. But for the NFL, who tiptoed so much tiptoeing through the Trump years, would they have risked making that a big issue, a big deal? I don't know. I don't know if they would have or not. I think they would have treaded very lightly around it, though.
I'm glad we didn't have to do that because I would have gotten myself fired. Michael Phillips is with us here on the Team 980. All right, so that gets us to Josh Harris. I made the argument yesterday that the practice facility is actually a more pressing project than the stadium. I don't know if it's more important because of the grandiose nature of what it's going to take to do this stadium, especially if it's in D.C., the political capital it's going to take. Nevertheless, the financial capital, like we're talking about a $2 to $5 billion project versus what could be a $300 or $400 million project in redoing the practice facility, probably. But I do think, like from a competitive standpoint, getting a new practice facility should be the number one thing, or completely revamping the practice facility should be the number one item on Josh Harris's to-do list. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I'll disagree. I think one domino has to fall before the other, and I think you got to figure out: are you going to do it all in one place, or are you going to do it piecemeal, like the Cowboys do it with the stadium and the Star and Frisco and all that? And what are you going to do with Landover? What are you going to do with Ashburn? I think the Ashburn land's probably so valuable that you sell it, and that's an immediate return on your investment there. Do you want to build a practice facility in Landover? They've got their little sports book there. I don't think that's moving the needle in a tangible way. I think you're probably pressing to get the whole thing together. Now, there's ways to do it quickly where, before the stadium opens, you can open the facility in that space while construction's ongoing. I think there's going to be obviously a surge of excitement. There is a surge of excitement right now. There will be a good crowd week one. There will be a lot of, cheering and people fired up. There's going to be a lull after that because, let's just put this out there, Craig. This isn't a Super Bowl roster, and this isn't a Super Bowl head coach, and they're not going to make the Super Bowl this year. And they might not next year.
You don't know that, Michael. Okay, you know that. You know that. It's fine.
This clip will be brought back to haunt me when we are in Vegas next year on Radio Row. There's going to be a lull at some point. And I think, you look at what the Rams did when they moved to L.A. They built the team towards we're hosting the Super Bowl in 20, was it 21, 22, whenever that was, the Super Bowl in L.A., and they won that Super Bowl. That was what they were building their roster to. I think you build this team with an eye towards 28. This isn't a Walton situation, throwing the money at Russell Wilson, Sean Payton, we got to win now. This isn't a Tepper situation. Oh my gosh, I paid so much money, I have to win. Give me my wins now. This is a group that will see the long game here. I think you're building towards 28. You open the new stadium with a competitive team. You make your case. Here we are. Come root for us. We're back.
So you and I are on the same page on another element of potential things to happen in 2028, because I saw your tweet yesterday about it, which is that if you want to rebrand, that is the time to do it. Keim was saying also that a team that rebrands apparently has to wait 5 years to do it again, which does complicate things, because what happens if they, okay, fine, they're not going to make the Super Bowl this year, but like, what if they're good in the next couple of years? And all of a sudden people are like, actually, Commanders endears good feelings. But what is the viability, likelihood, and intelligence in potentially changing the name again?
That's my favorite downside argument, by the way, of all time. Like, give me 1,000 of those. Like, but what if they won the Super Bowl? Then your argument would be foiled. Like, yes, I agree. Sign me up for that. Like, sure, of course. Yeah.
Okay, fine. We won't change the name because we have a Super Bowl trophy and we save $1 billion in rebrand.
You win, yes. Boy, do I look foolish here covering a Super Bowl team. Of course. If they get really good, the name sticks. Yes, obviously. If they don't get really good, that's your opportunity to reboot and reset and do it right. And that gives you the time to do it not publicly, not in a fake we care about your input but we actually don't kind of way, but just to quietly do it, get it right, and then spring it on us one day. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, that could be definitely interesting because, I don't know, it was my understanding that Commanders was a very Dan push, which explains why everyone hates it.
There was no litigation around it, and that was an important factor for that, for that group.
Which
is
a very un-Dan thing. He loves litigation. He really just... give me some litigation. Give me some lawyers. The Dan Snyder way. All right. Let's go through some personnel here. And I'm not trying to do this flippantly because these are people's jobs and livelihoods that we're talking about. But realistically, when it comes to the standard that, based off what we know about Josh Harris as an owner that he sets, the way he thinks about sports, and kind of how he's acted in Philly and to a lesser extent in New Jersey when he took over the Devils. Like, what do you think Ron Rivera's future looks like short and long term?
Well, I think it all depends on him. I mean, you talk about got to win. Like, I think Ron maybe has to win a playoff game this year. I don't even think getting to the playoffs is necessarily enough there. I think the other factor tied to that is you get the feeling they're going to want a general manager and not a one guy runs the show operation. And so I think the lean would probably be to just fully reset off of that as opposed to, recarving out a new role for Ron. If he wins, he gets to stay. Those are the rules. That's how sports works. We'll see what happens. I'm not saying it's impossible because I don't think it's impossible. All they needed to do last year, Craig, was beat the Cleveland Browns, and they would have been in the playoffs. And if they get Minnesota, I think they could have won that game against Minnesota. Like, you've got an alternate history here where he's got a playoff win under his belt at the end of last year by beating the Cleveland Browns. Like, again, we're not talking about, solving world hunger here. We're talking about beating the Cleveland Browns. So, yes, it's doable. I think it's more likely than not, though, they make a change at the end of the year. And I think part of that would be getting a general manager in place.
I think that's really smart and well put in terms of the structure, where he obviously goes after Daryl Morey pretty heavily in Philly, and that's after Sam Hinkie, two guys that are very well steeped in the analytics world and kind of more cutting-edge thinkers, which is another thing that I wonder about with Ron is, Ron is not close-minded to analytics and things, as proven by the fact that he loves to reference them. I looked at the data. I did this. It's just like, hey, man, well, if you looked at it and this is the result, perhaps you should look at some different numbers and get a little bit more training in that field. But I do wonder, Ron is someone with a vision. Ron is someone who has a philosophy, and it's clearly defined at this point. And I think he has a very dead set sight on what he wants to accomplish and how he thinks he can get there. And he said that he didn't really lay that out when Tepper took over in Carolina, and he thinks it cost him. I do wonder what the conversation between Rivera and Harris is like, and if Harris goes okay, I see what you're doing. Let's do what you think is right, and as long as you're on the right track, it's not going to be about winning a playoff game. It's not going to be a results-based thing. It's going to be about looking at kind of the results based off the track that you want to be on. Or is that conversation going to happen and Harris goes, I've been around smart people in sports. You don't cut it. And I already know that after this season that you're gone pretty much no matter what.
Well, he always leaned towards change when it's a new owner. He bought the team. Yeah. He wants his guys doing it his way instead of being told what way to do it. I think that's human nature. Any of us take over a project, we want to clean house, do it our way, so to speak. Eric Bieniemy is a really interesting factor in all of this. He's an intense dude, and Ron is an intense dude. A lot of that was masked by the pandemic and the cancer the first couple of years, but Ron is an equally intense dude. You got two really intense dudes coaching that team. I will be very curious how that plays with the modern player in 2023 this year. I think that's an interesting subplot. If Bieniemy does great, there's going to be a lot of pressure to make him the head coach. The NFL has a problem with getting qualified black candidates into head coaching jobs, and he has become the face of that, whether that is fair or unfair. If he produces quality results this year, there will be a lot of heat league-wide for him to get a head coaching job here or elsewhere, and I think that would be a major domino to fall. If he does poorly this year, the league also honestly is in a situation, because when you clean house, he's a guy with no landing spot at that point. You got to find something for him, but that's maybe less our problem at that point locally in Washington.
Right. All right. Michael Phillips with us, Richmond Times-Dispatch. Two other guys I want to ask you about. We'll go to the football-y one first, and that is Chase Young. How does this move affect the decision on Chase Young, considering Ron Rivera has said, I would like to wait for a new owner to kind of make this call? Well, he's not going to have him officially signed and in place, but if Harris, ultimately signs the paperwork or there's the exclusive deal in place and it's 100%, and it's just a matter of a league vote, I'm sure they can find a way to communicate about Chase Young. How do you think this affects Chase in the fifth-year option?
I took it as a courtesy to the Snyders when Ron said that. The Snyders and the Chase Young family are friends. They go back. I think he just didn't want that blood on Snyder's hands, so to speak, of having to make him decline the option of somebody who he clearly values his friendship with and the family values their friendship with on his way out the door. I think it negatively impacts Chase Young's fifth-year option.
And last one, and this might be the biggest one for the organization. What do you think Jason Wright's future is?
I think Jason Wright took some major lumps early on, and it was criticized for that, and rightly so. I think he has made positive strides recently. I think the redoing of the club level this year was very successful. I think people who had club level seats felt they got better value, a better experience at FedEx Field. I took that as a positive sign that he's perhaps learning and growing and moving towards the right path. I just don't see how you don't bring in your own people there, because you paid $6 billion for this thing. Honestly, it's nothing personal against Jason Wright. It's nothing personal against Ron Rivera. You paid $6 billion. You got a vision of what you want. You got to go make it happen. Could Jason Wright be in a modified role? Sure. I think you could move him into a track where he's overseeing the stadium and the fan outreach and all that, and you bring in your crew to do new stadium and big picture stuff. But anytime there's a change of this magnitude, they're going to want their people doing it their way. That's just an inevitability of somebody paying $6 billion for something.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that Jason's background, like what he did at McKinsey, was crisis management. And he guided them, not always, some of the stuff like with the Sean Taylor installation or whatever, like there was definitely bumps along the way. But largely, he did a good job of guiding them through a pretty impossible crisis, made harder by the fact that the people that he was guiding through it, the Snyders, were the ones that caused the crisis. And I do think that, Jason deserves some level of credit there. And maybe I think on some level deserves a shot to see what he can do in the first year or so. And, ultimately Harris is going to want to bring in his own people, and that'll happen eventually. But, if he does leave after a year, people should ultimately look back at Jason as someone who helped them get out of the crisis and get to a point that if change that is positive happens quickly, Jason can be to thank for that, for getting some infrastructure back in place and it's kind of the foundation in place for someone else to build off of.
When we give the final tally of the Ron Rivera era, it will sound very similar to that, Craig.
Yes.
Did he win a Super Bowl? No. Was he the best qualified football coach and made the best decisions every week? No. But dang if he didn't do the world's hardest job with dignity and hold that place together in a time when it had no business being held together.
That very well said. That's why he writes, everybody. Michael Phillips, sports editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Always great to have him here on the Hoffman Show. Thank you, sir.
All right, take care.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
ESPN's Field Yates joins us now. The Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. And Field, of course, ESPN NFL Insider. I assume that you've been following the whole sales story. Maybe not as close as we were day to day here, but when you finally hear the news yesterday, like, whoa, this is happening. I'm sure you saw the Sportico tweet like everybody else, and then, of course, Schefter gets it confirmed for you guys at ESPN as well. What was your reaction to this level of finality?
Yeah, the best day in the tenure of Dan Snyder owning the Washington franchise was yesterday. It was the single best day. As a matter of fact, one of the very few good days during this tenure. And I've been thinking about it more and more because oftentimes when there's change at any kind of level, a coach who gets fired, a GM who gets let go, a quarterback who gets benched, like, you can find ways to reflect and look back on things with a bit of a positive light. And I was trying to think back and what are the positives from this tenure, other than the fact that it is over? There has been a remarkable lack of success, and that obviously is not just limited to on the field. It's caused significant embarrassment. And we've probably talked about very few owners, maybe Jerry Jones, I guess, I can't even think of anybody else besides Jerry Jones, but there have been very few NFL owners that we have talked about more over the past 2 decades than Dan Snyder, and it's been for all the wrong reasons. So it's not often that an ownership group has as much influence in terms of what the changes might look like for the franchise going forward, as is the case now for the Commanders going forward.
So for those that don't know, because obviously most people just know you from TV. You've been doing it for a decade at this point, but you spent time in the league. You were with the Patriots. You were with the Chiefs, two widely considered very well-run organizations. Especially when you were with the Patriots, was kind of the middle of that of the run with Brady and obviously Kraft and Belichick and the whole deal. What kind of impact can an owner make on a football operation, either positively or negatively? And what kind of impact do you think Snyder made on purely the football, nevertheless the other more serious and embarrassing things over his tenure?
The best functioning organizations are when the football people are able to do the football responsibilities, and the people that are responsible for things like business handle business responsibilities. The problem for the past 2 decades is that football people were having to answer for Dan Snyder's almost literally unbelievable behavior, and it's a distraction. And I always tell people, I don't think the players, I don't think it necessarily hit them on a day-to-day basis. And it's not like Washington has been unable to sign free agents in general. Generally speaking, I think that the players in free agency choose the team that is offering the most money, but they've brought players in. They've had reputable members of the organization. There have been a lot of upstanding Commanders players over the past couple of decades, and certainly still are on the team right now. But I think that the football operation will feel such a weight off of its shoulders of constantly feeling like it has to answer for their own boss, the person who signs their check. And then I think on a more sort of hands-on level, the way that an ownership group can really influence and change a football product is that while there is a salary cap on how much you can spend on players, there's not on how much you can spend on resources. You can spend whatever you want on the coaching staff. You can spend as much as you want on an improved facility, whether it's the weight room or the practice fields or whatever it might be, the nutritionist. All those factors that can be limited by an owner can also be potentially heightened in a significant way by an ownership group that's willing to fork over a record sale price of $6.05 billion dollars to take over this Commanders franchise.
Field Yates, ESPN, with us. I have said over the last, 24 to 28 hours, however long this has been, that while the stadium is the sexier project in terms of what has to be done next by the new owner, presumably Josh Harris, that the practice facility is actually the more important thing because it's day-to-day. Michael Phillips from the Richmond Times-Dispatch made a really good point in terms of the chronology earlier, that because they might want the practice facility at the stadium site, they probably have to figure out the stadium situation first. That's just logistics. But in terms of importance, how would you describe the how left behind a team is? I'll phrase it that way. If they are not up to par on a weight room facility, on meeting room, capabilities, on all of the things that so many of these teams have in their more modern facilities that have been built and become kind of commonplace around the league.
around the league.
Listen, you can win without that stuff. The Bengals don't even have an indoor facility, and they are currently they are either that's been a recent development for them. Like they have to walk across the street to get to their practice fields. Like they have been miles behind the rest of the league for a long time, and obviously they've been one of the best teams in the NFL over the past 2 seasons. Great players are going to win you football games, but I think where it matters is that when you are a player on a team and you're pondering your future with that team, you don't want to stick here because this organization is serious about winning. And if I have the opportunity to go elsewhere and make comparable, if not more money, then maybe I will go somewhere else because this place isn't serious about winning. But I think that you have the opportunity to show that you're serious about it. And, you know, I know that people sometimes have a lack of empathy for professional athletes because in the cases of many, they're making millions of dollars to play this sport, but they also have to go through the season. And if you're going through what is a 6 or 7 month march and it's just miserable to show up to work every day, it's going to have, you know, maybe a small effect on how you perform on the field come Sunday. So I would say, though, that more than like just the practice facility or the field, the stadium, like the respectability is going to matter a whole lot more. And I use the Bengals as a good example because for I don't know how long, you and I are a similar age range, Craig, and think about how long we knew the Bengals as the laughing stock of the NFL. It doesn't feel that way anymore, right? They feel like one of the organizations where players would want to go play. And one of the organizations that if you had to make a short list of the teams most likely to win a Super Bowl in the next 5 years, they would be on it. The Commanders can change some of that because they can win. And I just feel like having an ownership group that's not Dan Snyder helps get us closer to that point, even before they play the game on the field.
No doubt. And if they can draft whoever their equivalent of Joe Burrow or acquire somehow someone like Joe Burrow, you know, that tends to help too. As you said, like the great players can override it, but you'd rather rely on solid infrastructure to then support those players, et cetera, et cetera. Again, Field Yates is our guest from ESPN. The other big thing, Field, that I'm so happy that you're on today to talk about that I'm super interested in is I don't know if to call it an analytics revolution is too strong, but the insertion of analytics into how people think about football. And not only like folks like yourself or Mina or whoever on television, Bill Barnwell writing about it, but folks inside the league. Because Josh Harris in Philadelphia with the 76ers obviously has employed Sam Hinkie, employed Daryl Morey, people that are on the cutting edge of how basketball is thought about and how to build a team. So I would imagine as he gets in here in Washington, he's going to think the same. What can you tell us generally about how analytics has started to inform team building and the way teams play and how that could change, the direction of this franchise if there's a bigger investment in that area?
Yeah, the most important thing I can always remind people about analytics is just because a team employs analytics, it does not mean that it is run by analytics. It means that it's a part of the equation, right? It is about influencing decisions. And in the same way that film study or any number of things can influence a decision that involves a player being assigned or cuts or a play design or decision making within the course of a game. That's where analytics matters. And I actually think Ron made reference to the numbers last year when he was talking about the decision to acquire Carson Wentz. And I think one of the first things he said, I think it was something to the effect of like, we saw the analytics on Carson and obviously we studied the game film as well. But I think it helps make for a more fundamentally sound decision-making process across the board. I think it's healthy to have a room full of people who are not simply going to say yes to whoever is in charge, but rather are going to bring fresh and different perspectives and have a much more comprehensive approach to every decision that you wind up making.
Yeah. The Carson thing was so funny with the analytics because it was just so bad. And it's like, if you were...
What were the analytics?
Right.
Yeah.
And it goes to show too. I mean, this was the case for a long time in the NBA. Which is a more data-heavy sport for a lot of reasons. Where it was like, everyone's got the data. Some of them are actually good at looking at it, and some of them are not. And I think that's the separator too. And I do wonder if Harris can find some of the smarter people who know what to do with the data and employs them in the same way that he has in Philadelphia.
that'll be an interesting decision-making process that he has on his hands. But you're right. I mean, I think that just expanding your resources in general is a good approach because there is so much more available than we thought there was for so long when decision-making relied upon much more traditional measures.
No doubt. A couple more minutes here with Field Yates of ESPN NFL Insider. You can watch him regularly on NFL Live. He's got the Fantasy Focus podcast. He's got a lot of stuff. Basically, if you want to hear Field Yates football insight, you can do that. And luckily, he's given it to us here on the radio. Perhaps the biggest, most immediate decision that Rivera has to make is Chase Young. The fifth-year option coming. There's a lot of people that think that he just kind of wanted to wait out the ownership situation because Snyder and Young's family are close and all of that stuff. And he kind of didn't want, I'll borrow the phrase that Michael used earlier, the blood on Snyder's hands. With knowing that Montez Sweat also is due a contract soon, that they just signed Deron Payne, how would you be approaching the fifth-year option for Chase Young and the decision the Commanders have to make?
Yeah, Craig, I'm not going to sidestep the question. I am simply going to offer this. When Ron Rivera mentions that it's about the knee, then that suggests to me there's a lot going on there for a knee injury that, of course, limited Chase to 3 games last season. Missed the first 14 of the year before playing the final 3 of the season. If that thing is something that still is an issue for him going forward, then that's a decision that no matter what you think of him as a player, if you don't know the total scope of what he is dealing with medically, it's impossible for us to think that this is a layup decision one way or the other. Based off of ability and the pass rush position, whether you want to call it a defensive end, outside linebacker, edge, however you want to categorize it, it's an easy yes. But because that fifth-year option is now fully guaranteed, which was implemented recently, it's not I'm sure you recall, this is not like the RG3 situation where you pick up the fifth-year option and then in the 4th year of his contract, it's a non-guaranteed deal. He becomes the scout team safety and then just watches practice from the sideline for the rest of the season. So I don't think we're in that territory. I think that the fact that Ron has highlighted just how important the medical side of it suggests to me that knee injury was certainly more complex than maybe some people just would assume, given how many athletes are coming back from torn ACLs with basically no long-term impact. So I don't want to cop out, but I don't know exactly what's going on there with the knee, which makes me wonder this makes me think, I should say, that Ron was not giving us lip service. It's legitimately a decision they are pondering and will continue to ponder once they have Chase back in the building for some of these off-season workouts.
Yeah, they have a couple of workouts they can do before that May 2nd deadline. Great insight, as always, from our guy Field Yates, ESPN NFL Insider. Anything coming up this weekend or next week that you want to highlight that you guys are doing leading up to the draft and everything?
Yeah, all kinds of draft shows. So lots of SportsCenter specials that'll be on each night and then also available on ESPN Plus for those who like to watch things on demand. I'm telling you, if you're looking for a crash course to the NFL draft, head over to ESPN Plus. You get all kinds of Kuiper and McShay content.
I mean, that's what we live for this time of year, so that's good stuff.
It's the best.
Field Yates, everybody. Field, thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. All right, we have had a heck of a day. So many great guests. The Schlereth interview is up on all of our platforms. If it's already probably blowing up the internet. He called Dan Snyder a turd and told just this incredible story about the first time he had kind of an experience with him and was just like, this is bad. Do not like this. Not the internet. Also, Anthony, just like at a dinner table with Dan Snyder, not a place for the faint of heart, apparently, or with Mark Schlereth, a radio interview, being in the crosshairs of Mark Schlereth, not for the faint of heart. Neither is the comment section of the internet, Anthony. We didn't get a chance to dive in, though, this week.
Uh-oh. I know it's a lot of comments on this guy, Daniel Snyder.
Yeah, there are. What do you say that we read the comments?
We read those comments, baby.
Incredible. I set you up so poorly, and yet you came through like the man that you are.
I got you, man. I got your back.
All right. So I'm going to be honest, because of all the craziness that we've had, all these interviews, everything, I haven't exactly screened all the comments. So, Anthony, we're just going to roll down the most recent ones because everything we posted in the past couple of days is, of course, about Snyder, about Harris. Spaceman Spiff says, for some insight into Harris's ethos in sports, check out his panel discussions from the past MIT Sloan conferences. He participated in panels about analytics and big data in sports, as well as creating a sports legacy. I've actually seen some of those. I haven't had a chance to read them yet. But, Anthony, I would simply ask you, when was the last time you think that the principal person in charge of the Washington Commanders was involved in the Sloan Analytics Conference, the premier sports analytics conference on the planet?
Actually hilarious. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe never.
Yeah, the correct answer is never. Yeah. Never. And now Josh Harris, he's the guy. Christopher Callaway Brooks says, good show. Heavy on the analytics. Ron should be okay for this. Heavy on the practice facilities. Wait on the stadium until they win a few playoff games. Agree with you on this 100%. Actually, that's not what I said, and I think it's important just in terms of the chronology here. Michael Phillips did a good job of clarifying this today. They've got to decide where they want the stadium first. That is the most important thing, because once you decide where the stadium is, you're then also deciding what kind of facility that you want. Do you want to be like the 49ers that have their practice facility and stadium in the same place? And Anthony, I don't know if you remember this, but way back when we talked about this during the season with Logan. And Logan, who played in San Francisco, said he actually didn't really like that very much. Because, yeah, from a convenience standpoint, easier drive, but you don't quite get up for game day in the same way. That because it's the place that you go every day for practice, like pulling into the same parking spot for a game, well, I'm sure there's some like sports psychology people that be like, well, it's good because it's the same routine and there's a comfort of home. Like there's something about like, no, I'm going to the arena for a game. That's different than, yeah, I'm going to work. Especially because that's what practice is for these guys, is work or the meetings and all this kind of stuff. So I think they're like that element is going to be secondary to a lot of infrastructure things. But I thought that was an interesting perspective from Logan as a former player. But I don't know, like I doubt as a fan, like you don't really care if the practice facility and the stadium's in the same place. You just want a good stadium to go to the 10 times a year that you go.
Yeah, I wouldn't really care, but it also gives, like high school or. It gives like high school vibes because essentially where you practice is where you host most of your games. So I think maybe I get where Logan's coming from, because you get away from it when you go off to college. Like your entire practice facility is way different than where you play.
Yeah, and I think there's something to like practicing, it can elevate a practice by doing it at the stadium. There's obviously the fans and letting them watch is the biggest thing of why they do the scrimmages typically, or some kind of scrimmage, some kind of practice open in the stadium one time before the first preseason game. But there's also like hey, we've been on the practice field so much. Like let's go to a different environment. So I do think it's something to be considered. But I think more realistically, it's the land. Like how much land can you get? Where is that land? What can you do with it? Because it's not just, I mean, the space you need for grass, you need at least 2, if not 3 fields, right? So that's at least 200 yards long, plus areas on either end for, a little extra padding. Or I guess if you do them side by side, you get the 120. So this would be 240 if you did them back to back, because that's how that math works. But 120 yards with the end zones end to end, double wide, if not triple wide. And that's just the grass. You also at your practice facility need a ton of meeting space. And so I wonder, they've got the Landover site, they've got Ashburn, and they have the business operations they have to house as well. So could they turn Ashburn completely into the business operations center? Could they turn Landover into the football center? Do they want to separate those two? And then do they need another spot for the stadium? Or do they rebuild in Landover, knock down FedEx, and then build something else? That seems unplausible. You can't do it on the same site because you need somewhere to play. And you can't build a stadium between, let's say the last home game is in December even. Now that the season goes to mid-January. The last 2 are on the road. You finish in December. You need it open by August. That's not possible. That's too big of a construction project. And that's why it's really important for them to get this done as soon as possible in terms of deciding where it is. Even if once you decide, you can build the practice facility first because you'll be able to use that immediately as soon as it's up and ready. And then the stadium, whenever, the lease at FedEx is done and all that kind of stuff, and you get it ready, depending on how much money they got, they could probably break that lease. But I just think from a construction standpoint, they're not going to be able to build a new stadium. But they got to figure out the where first. So it's obviously important. People getting super excited in the comments as well on my opening monologue yesterday, which received a lot of positive feedback. So I appreciate everyone who reached out on Twitter and everything on that. But P says, this is our Super Bowl. Sky Buddy says, I could cry. I'm so bleeping happy right now. Neil, Harris is a solid, experienced owner with no scandals or poor behavior in his background. This is a serious upgrade where it matters most. And I think that was kind of the crux of, what I said yesterday was when you lay out all the stuff that happened and the idea that it didn't have to be that way. It's just so sad because it almost wasn't. I was listening to Kimes' podcast earlier, and Anthony, he talked about this too. It's they almost were maybe we should do a little more research on this guy. And they quickly realized, I should say, that they should have done a little more research on Snyder. And they would have realized, he's not all he's cracked up to be. And instead, they roll with this guy, despite the fact that he doesn't really have the money. And you see what happens. It's awful. Could you imagine in 2023, the NFL doing as little homework as they did on Dan Snyder in 1999?
Nah, not at all.
It breaks your brain to think that that's what happened. And yet, here we are. Here we are, all these years, all these scandals. And, the thing that's crazy to me, too, is, at no point along the way did they do anything major to shift. And I do, the NFL's always been big and important, but it's just there's a different standard now, post 2020. And I happen to be on the side of that thinks that it's a good thing, that accountability for bad behavior is good. But the level that people care now is just different, and the consequences are very different. Miss Perry comments, I can think of no better way to summarize the end of an error. Well said, Craig. Error. ERROR, Anthony.
That's actually funny. Nice play on words there.
I like that. I've seen that a lot. Obi says, ding dong, the witch is dead. Hopefully Harris isn't going to be a case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I don't think...
Nah, the bar is already low. I don't think he can stoop any lower.
No, he certainly can't go lower unless he were to murder someone. Yeah. But outside of that, you can't really stoop lower. The question is, can you be as bad? And I think definitively, based off Josh Harris's track record, no, he's not going to be nearly as bad. We also have we had some other stuff that obviously got people going in the comments, more on the football side of things. Back and forth in the comments from some folks about the Jeff Okudah trade and what it means for Chase Young. Samuel says, just pick up the option, please. Well, you have Jason saying, it isn't sobering for fans. It's what we expect. No one has valued our players like that. The idea that could Chase Young only be worth like a 4th or 5th rounder, where Okudah was worth a 5th rounder. And you have folks like Victor who, like, all the Chase haters are going to be riding his, you know what. He didn't use quite the full, like, vulgarity version. I just don't know whether I should say it on the radio. But you know, they'll be excited to be back on the Chase bandwagon. That's probably a better way. I should have just cleaned up and edited that. This is what happens when you don't read them all beforehand. After he bounces back, I think the risk-reward game with Chase Young when it comes to this 5th-year option is pretty simple. Like, you just see what happens. You don't have all the data yet. There's no reason to sign on. And whether it's what Michael said, where this has all been a courtesy to the Snyders to say, like, yeah, we'll wait till you're gone and then we'll make our decision because, you know, Chase's family and we're not going to ruin that relationship for you and we should be able to keep that. It's a little parting gift from the Riveras to the Snyders on the way out. Or it's like what Field Yates says, and they really don't know about his knee. And they're like, look, you came back and you showed some things last year. It took a lot longer than we expected, but this injury was super complicated, and we don't know if you still are capable of being the guy that we drafted you to be, and thus we're not going to pay you like that. I think it's a tough call, that's why I tend to lean towards not picking it up. This was a lot easier decision, because I was trying to think, when I was covering the team and they had this decision to make on Robert, they picked up the option, which seems crazy because he was never going to play. But the reason they did it was because it was only guaranteed for injury. So as long as, and in hindsight, that was still even stupid. But the only way they were going to have to pay Griffin the money was if he got hurt, which is why there was no chance he was ever going to see the field that year. But for Chase, it's not. They changed the rule. So if they pick up the option, like, it is $17 million guaranteed next year. And I would simply ask any fan, like, what has Chase Young done to deserve $17 million next year? I would say the answer is nothing. I mean, he won Rookie of the Year, which is why it's 17 and not 12. But unfortunately, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, I think this is a league where it's more so, what have you done recently for me? And Chase necessarily hasn't, been on the field the last 2 years almost. Sophomore year, he slumped a little bit, and then last year, he missed the greater part of the season. So I think you said it best. We should wait and we should see. If Chase goes out there, records double-digit sacks, I mean, I would lean towards, giving him that extension over, re-signing to Montez. But, again, we want to wait and see. And I think the risk outweighs the reward right now.
Yeah, I agree. Because, I mean, again, I don't know if I don't know what to do with Montez either, to be honest. Like, the idea of paying him $20-something million a year, and I really like Montez Sweat as a football player. The idea of paying him $20-something million a year, it doesn't exactly sit great with me. So, like, when you say you got to pick one next year, like, let's see which one of them is worth it. See which one of them has the better season. And, like, if Montez goes out and, like, all of a sudden turns himself into a double-digit sack guy, then sure, you pay him a lot of money and you feel good about it, and you maybe move on from Chase. Also, the draft this year, by the way, also impacts that. What if all of a sudden the best player available at 16 is an edge guy and you have like a top 10 grade on him, and whether it's Nolan Smith or whoever else, and you're like, that's our dude, Lucas Van Ness, and you're like, cool, we got a replacement for one of them. Now we just see who has the better season. We franchise that guy and work out a long-term deal, and then we got a rookie at the other spot. And that way it sucks because you lose them for nothing, which is bad franchise management. But you didn't, like, I'd rather lose someone for nothing and get the comp pick than overpay them and then realize we made a mistake before the contract even kicks in. Like that, that's the risk reward.
I think that's what we've done so often. Like, we've overpaid guys, and it's come to, bite us in the butt. And I think we're finally learning from the past, those past mistakes, and hopefully turn over a new leaf.
Yes, no doubt about it. All right, last thing we'll get to in this edition of Never Read the Comments. We broke down earlier this week Mel Kiper's latest mock draft, asked fans and listeners, who do you think the Commanders should take at 16? Based off of that, some of the corners, some of the old linemen falling, not falling. A couple of different thoughts from that. Commanders fan in Texas says trade back and take Forbes. I like that play. Hermit Rob says all over Branch at 16. Pro ready, superb open field tackler, ridiculously versatile, ball hawk, has a little ST Ed Reed in him. Plug and play, no brainer. Again, that was not me saying he's got a little Sean Taylor in him. That's Ed Reed. Like, those are two of the greatest safeties to ever lace up a pair of cleats. I'm not going there. Branch is, like Dot was enormous. He's a big freaking dude. Brian Branch is undersized for a safety. He's basically my size, 6 foot 190. I don't think I'm ready to play safety in the NFL from a size perspective. Corner maybe a little bit more. I don't quite have the athletic traits or skill, but at least from a size perspective, we got a little bit better. But like that, he's a tough one because I do think he could be like, he's so productive at Alabama that the idea of taking him is really appealing. Like, hey, yeah, let's take a guy who's awesome. And it feels like the Kyle Hamilton thing for Baltimore last year. But Hamilton was a lot bigger. And so, I don't know. I go back and forth on Branch. I tend to lean towards I would take him. And I feel like someone's going to like him. And I feel like he's going to go in the first round. But some of those guys have fallen. Like Petrie from Baylor fell last year and then had a really, really productive rookie year in Houston. So, basically, I'm just the shrug emoji right now, Anthony. I don't know.
I think we all are, to be honest. That's where I am too. I mean, I like Branch. Last year, if we had the chance to get this dude, I would have been all over it. Again, like Kyle Hamilton. That's who I wanted. That was my guy. We, settled for Jahan, and it paid dividends. But,
we settled for Jahan, who looks like he's going to be incredible.
Exactly. But you just don't know how these things will end up. And who's to say we can't get him in a second? I'm just saying.
Yeah, to me, the guy that I feel best about has the best combination of everything right now is Deonte Banks. Like, he's a good tackler. He's fast. He's big. He's physical. Like, he's played in a bunch of different, not different schemes, but like they did a bunch of different stuff at Maryland. He's played man. He's played zone. He's played 2. He's played 3. Like, he's the guy that I feel the best about. But I think there's potential bigger reward for a guy like Forbes, a guy like Branch, Porter Jr. even. He hasn't done a lot of the stuff that Banks has done, but like from a physical tool standpoint, he's right there. But Banks also, like, his raw athletic score is nuts. He's like one of the best corners in this class from an athletic standpoint. So he just seems like it's in a way, like, people talk about all the deficiencies in the other guys, and they get to Banks and they're like, well, the only problem is, like, we've seen him play man and zone, and he mixed and matched so much that we don't really know what to make of him because there's not enough snaps. And I'm like, that's a problem? That sounds great. Sign me up.
Who would you say would fit the best in the slot of the corners that are, up for discussion? I only ask that because, we have Kendall, we have St. Juice on the outside. That's what it seems like. And then that, Buffalo nickel or just nickel cornerback is sort of like what we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, Branch probably, but I do wonder about, like, his quickness and speed, especially as more, like, premier receivers line up in the slot and, like, run these slot fades, and that's big play potential if a guy can't run with those guys.
Yep.
They also play so much 3 safety that it's like, well, Cam Curl? Can I say Cam Curl? Because they now have Butler and they have Forrest that are going to play back as well. So they got the 3 safeties. I guess Branch, but like Forbes is intriguing to me in there as well. Like small, scrappy guy. But that's not necessarily how slot corners are built anymore. Like there's a reason they wanted to push St. Juste inside, and he's big, he's physical, but also is quick. So I don't know, man. It's tough.
Nobody knows, man.
Yeah, it's all the projection game. All right, when we get back, close out the show. Real things, real people said into real microphones. The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live as well on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, wrapping up an incredible show here on the Team 980. Just a nutty day. A nutty day. Mark Schlereth takes the cake on the day. I mean, Field Yates was awesome. Michael Phillips was awesome. Clinton Yates was awesome. It was a double Yates day. You got to love a double Yates day. But I think what takes the cake today, Anthony, is something that we're just going to have to replay, and a little thing we like to call real things real people said into real microphones.
Real things. We're not gonna be sucked this year. Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Whew. All right, let's run it back. Mark Schlereth on with us not that long ago called Dan Snyder a what?
Man, I was so excited because Dan Snyder, in my opinion, is a turd. So, one of my life experiences, just don't be a turd. Like, that is one of the things I believe in, and I am so glad that he is gone.
Mark told a great story later. It kind of explained in terms of his personal experience with Dan, too. It was just incredible and so perfectly Dan Snyder. Highly recommend going back and listening to the full interview if you have missed it. It is available now on our podcast feed. It's also on my YouTube page. It's also on the Team 980's YouTube page. It's also on the team980.com. It is literally anywhere you would go looking for it. I'll retweet a link to at Craig Hoffman if I didn't already. 1,000% worth it. Please go and check that out for your own personal enjoyment. Other things, real things that real people said into real microphones, kind of calls that you get on days like today. This is this morning, I believe, from the Junkies. Tears upon the news of Dan Snyder selling the Washington Commanders.
Very cool.
Yeah,
What do you think?
The analogy of what I found last night, my wife's going, why so emotional? Like, imagine that someone who's kidnapped for 25 years, and now they're getting them back.
Wow, it has hit you, Tom.
Is this real?
No, it's real.
Ransom terms have been reached. Doesn't mean the guy's a better person for receiving a ransom. It shows he's a bigger criminal.
Wow. That's a heck of an analogy. But, I mean, the thing is, like, without getting too deep into human psychology here, like, we're talking about something that people loved, something that people have core memories with. And now, all of a sudden, it is back, they hope, soon to some semblance of the way that it used to be. What I just hope is that, you know, fans that are old enough to remember the RFK days, fans that are old enough to have great memories of this team and remember winning, realize that it's not going to be that because the league and the world has changed. We're in a different era of the NFL. We're in a different era of sports and how this all works. And so I do think it's important to remember that this is not going to be all of a sudden we're back at a decrepit RFK, but things are great now. What's going to happen here is that it's going to be like a couple of years of feeling similar, but at least you don't have to feel guilty about rooting for the team. And it'll change over time. And the new stadium will probably be the moment where it feels the most different, unless there's major winning, which is also possible. Like, who knows? But it's not, even that will feel different than it used to, which is fine. Like, make new memories. Like, you might have gone to the games with your parents, take your kids. Like, sucks that your generation of kind of young adulthood probably got skipped over. But now you get to enjoy it in the newer life. So earlier in the week when we had DA on, we stumbled into him telling us that his producer and also guest on the show frequently, Sean Mraz, was having a colonoscopy this week. And he had to fast. It didn't go well. It went so poorly that about 4 hours in, he was smelling his own shoe to try to make himself not feel hungry. So after he had the procedure, which apparently went well enough, he's back out on the other side of things. Mraz was hungry. Mraz, what did he eat?
what was the meal when you came out of that place, and how did it taste?
Okay, so first they gave me honey grams and apple juice as soon as I was sitting out of there, and I wolfed them down like a dog when you put the ball down. But then I walked out, Danielle picked me up, and she had a Jersey Mike sub, a chicken cheesesteak with peppers and onions. She put lettuce, tomato, mayo on it. She added bacon for me.
Wow.
Got me baked barbecue Lay's, and I'm not a big soda guy, but got me a Diet Pepsi, like an oil drum. And she started yelling at me that I was getting lettuce all over the car because I was eating it, where it was flying all over the place out of my mouth. And then I went home and proceeded to bury a bunch of trail mix and another half a bag of chips.
And then did you eat like a wolf last night for dinner?
Yeah, so then dinner we had our own Crunchwrap Supremes, real ones, made on a hot griddle. I had 2 of them. Usually I have 1. And then I sat around. I had 3 rainbow cookies left over from Easter. And then at about 9 o'clock last night, as I was getting ready for bed, I had a chocolate Pop-Tart. To which my wife turned to me and said, "Boy, you really put on all those 7 pounds you lost overnight back on, huh?"
So you shed 7 pounds for the fast.
7 pounds, yeah. I didn't get on a scale this morning, but I felt so deprived. I feel myself now. I really do. Although they did warn me 3 days I could go without a movement of the old bowels.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. We're good. That's where the DA show can. If you want more on Mraz's status, the DA show, 6 to 10 a.m. mornings on CBS Sports Radio. You can also listen live on the free Odyssey app. Wrap up the show with this one. Anthony, do you watch Welcome to Wrexham?
I don't.
Okay, it's amazing. Wrexham having a phenomenal season in the National League, the 5th tier of English football. That's, of course, the team owned by Ryan Reynolds. And Rob, what's his name? What? That's often how it's said. It's McElhenney. And now, as a birthday present from Ryan Reynolds, to Rob McElhenney, we all have a song, which we will play you a small part of, to remind us.
McElhenney, what ways to massacre and mispronounce it, there are many.
McElhenney.
McElhenney. McElhenney. If there was doubt, now there won't be any. It's McElhenney.
Okay, we should probably fade that out before we get to a part that has to get bleeped. Okay, Anthony bleeped it in case. All right, that's good, Ant. Oh man, that's so good. It's like a 2-minute, 20-second video that is like a fully produced music video. Oh, how it must be nice to be able to buy your friends music videos on the pronunciation of their names if you have Ryan Reynolds money. All right, that's it. That's all for the show. Miss anything? Check it out on all our on-demand platforms. We'll see you Monday. BetMGM Tonight is next.
The Team 980 is always live.